Hello friends, this is Worm and we're back with another episode of the mini-series called Fix It. The series where we take a look at every single weapon sub-archetype in Destiny 2 and talk about how we can either bring it up to be more in line with everything or bring it down to be more in line with all other weapon archetypes in the game, also without totally killing their niche role. Of course, last episode we talked about aggressive glaives and we had some pretty big changes for aggressive glaives, and then today we're moving on to adaptive glaives. And I'm just going to come right out and say it. I don't like the idea of adaptive glaives. I never have. Adaptive weapons, they are a really boring weapon archetype as it is, adaptive auto rifles, hand cannons, stuff like that. Like, they're boring. They don't do anything exceptionally well. Like, they're just kind of good all-arounders, I guess, a jack of all trades, if you will. But for every other weapon archetype, it kind of works, it kind of works. It's got mid stats across the board, but its mid stats lead it to be better than other archetypes, worse than other archetypes. But with glaives, I don't think that adaptive glaive should even exist. Like, I think each archetype of glaive, or sub-archetype, I should say, of glaive should have unique, a unique feel and a unique ability about it, right? That's why we said aggressive glaive should have a different fire pattern, and you can go watch the whole aggressive glaive video. But with adaptive glaives, the first change that I would say needs to happen to adaptive glaives is to remove that archetype from the game. Okay, adaptive glaive is no more, and instead replace it with a new glaive frame called a defensive frame. And a defensive frame is exactly what it sounds like. It is a frame that builds much more into the defensive capabilities of the glaive rather than the offensive. Of course, last episode with aggressive glaives, that was about being up close in your face, taking enemies on head on. But with the defensive frame, it's much more about the defense. So at base, the defensive frame glaive would have much higher shield duration. In fact, it would have so much higher shield duration, shield duration, that if you build into shield duration, you can easily max out its shield duration. That way it can have a really long lasting shield. Of course, that would be the first step and kind of the most important step. You just raise that shield duration up a lot. And then aggressives and rapid fires, which we'll talk about rapid fires later, but they wouldn't have nearly as high. So if you really want a defensive option, you would definitely want to go with the defense frame. However, on top of having a defense frame, because like shield duration, I feel like is the only stat on glaives I really care about. Like, if I see a glaive with a high shield duration, that's the glaive I'm using, whether it's aggressive, whether it's defensive, blah blah, all that good stuff. So the trade-off that I would say for having a more defensive glaive shield is perhaps a shield that doesn't absorb quite as much damage. It lasts a lot longer, but it doesn't absorb quite as much damage. Now, of course, in the grand scheme of things, you can block a lot more damage than you could with, say, a glaive and rapid fire, but at the same time, it is kind of more situational. Again, we don't want to make glaives just completely overpower, and we don't want to talk about making a certain sub-archetype of glaive even better than all the others. So I think maybe just reducing the damage resistance from that glaive shield. But I also think that the defensive frame should come with some inherent built-in bonuses that help it fulfill that role better. And one of the built-in bonuses that I would put on the defensive frame glaive would be a faster movement speed while you're blocking. And this is a very, very important aspect if you're going to be using glaives in general. Like tilting at windmills, that's currently a perk that exists on some glaives that allows you to move faster when you're blocking damage, and that is I really enjoy that perk. Like, if I'm going to use a glaive defensively, that really helps it because I can move in much faster. And for defensive frame glaives, I would say that should kind of be built into it. Then of course you could have tilting at windmills for an even faster movement speed while you're blocking with that shield, but I think that would help to make it where it's a more defensive weapon. Like, yes, you can use it offensively, it still has melee capabilities and stuff like that, but its real purpose is that shield, and the ability to block with that shield, and the ability to pair it with things like replenishing Aegis, for example, that gives you more ammo and stuff in your glaive, that automatically reloads your glaive, mind you, while you're blocking damage. That way you can continue to keep that shield up for an extended duration, but you can also use it to maybe move up and get a res on a down teammate, or to move up and, you know, block for a teammate. That's how I frequently use glaives. I'll go up and, you know, if I see a teammate's getting injured, I'll go up and block in front of them. That way they have a chance to move back to cover. Or, you know, just if you want to take aggro from, say, a boss, you know, you want a boss focus on you because they have an explosive or an area of effect attack, move forward, you know, and allows you to kind of strafe, so you can move in and out of that area of effects, you know, thing much easier, and you can keep that shield up for longer. Now, I also think that another key with the defensive frame glaive, to make it feel, again, just different than the other archetypes, sub-archetypes of glaives, is to give it a small degree of tracking for its projectiles. Again, the projectiles, you want them to be able to hit their target so you can replenish your shield. So I think that having shots that track, maybe with like the tracking level of like beacon rounds at tier 1, is probably good. It doesn't have to literally track like, you know, a truth rocket. It doesn't have to, you know, turn left if an enemy goes left, but just kind of a little bit of a trajectory change. That way it will easily hit a target that's not moving like too fast or anything. Like, you know, again, we wouldn't want in the Crucible for a glaive projectile to track you from around a wall or something like that. But maybe if you're, you know, in the Crucible and you're ADSing and you're moving very slowly, yeah, it's easier to hit. And again, the reason why it's easier to hit is so that you can replenish that shield even more. Another trade-off we could potentially make to this defensive frame glaive is to reduce the actual projectile damage, so that the projectile is not dealing as much damage as it normally would. But again, that trade-off, you get that faster movement speed with it, you get that, you know, that longer lasting shield, that substantially longer lasting shield, and stuff like that. But yeah, that's really what I would do. I don't think that it needs anything else. I think that adaptive frames are just, there's no place for them in the game. Like, I don't like using adaptive frames. I don't really like using rapid fire frames either, but we'll talk about rapid fire frames in the next episode. You know, but I think that doing that would give it more of a niche role. Okay, you can still use your aggressive glaives for your up front, you know, in your face. If you want to use Karnstein armlets, for example, you know, and just melee everything and stuff like that, just keep it chaining together for infinite healing and big damage, use your aggressive flames. But if you want something that's more the opposite of that, something that's a lot more defensive, a lot more safe, you can protect yourself, you use the defensive frame glaive, which of course replaces adaptive frame. Now, one other idea that I had that I don't really know how it would play out, like in my head here, it's some type of perk or some type of ability built into the frame itself that would allow players to heal themselves after taking X amount of damage. And the idea that I played with behind this is, once you receive X amount of damage, you create a healing burst around you, okay, similar to Crest of Alpha Lupi. Okay, it doesn't begin health regeneration, but it gives you, like, basically you and everyone around you maybe cure ×1, you know, just to replenish your health. That way, if you're up there and you're blocking all that damage, you know, you're shooting your shots, you're taking the brunt of a boss's damage. Say it's an ogre, right? They're just pumping damage into you. You're constantly able to heal. You get that healing burst. It heals you. It could also heal your allies behind you, so that it could maybe synergize with Solar, you know, Ember of Benevolence or something like that. But again, that's an idea that I don't really know how that would work. And I think that the damage threshold to meet that healing effect would have to be really, really high, because you don't want to be just standing there in front of a couple of enemies and just constantly healing yourself, right? Like, you know, you'd want to use the defensive frame glaive in a defensive manner. You want to be taking the brunt of the damage. So, you know, I don't know exact damage numbers that bosses deal to guardians and stuff like that, but I think that would be probably something else to consider for the defensive frame glaive. But yeah, that's it for adaptives. Again, I don't like the idea of adaptives. I do not like the idea of adaptive glaives. They should be changed to a defensive glaive, but I want to hear your thoughts on adaptive glaives. Do you like them? I mean, I could be, maybe I'm just assuming too much, but I don't think they're that good. But tell me about adaptive glaives. Tell me what your thoughts are on the defensive frame glaive that I talked about today. And of course, drop a like, it helps the channel out a lot. Subscribe for more daily Destiny content, conversations, debates, discussions, all that good stuff. And do me a favor, watch the videos you see on the end screen, because for whatever reason, YouTube thinks you will like them. See you on the next one, guys. Bye for now.